My name is Crystal, and I want to share something with you today. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you gave up everything for them, only to discover they had been lying to you the entire time? If you have, then you need to hear my story until the very end. 3 years ago, I met a man named Andy online. He said he was a businessman from abroad, and he seemed perfect. We talked every single day through video calls. He was charming, kind, and he made me feel special. Andy told me about his life in his country, which I will keep private, his work, and his dreams. He asked about mine too. I was working as a teacher in my hometown, living a simple but happy life. When Andy proposed after 2 years of talking, I said yes without hesitation. I thought I knew everything about him. I thought we had built something real. Looking back now, I realize how blind I was. But at that moment, standing in my small apartment holding my phone with tears running down my face, I believed in fairy tales. I believed in him. That belief would cost me everything. Planning the wedding from different countries was difficult, but Andy made it work. He sent money for my dress, for the ceremony with my family, and for my visa paperwork. If you have ever planned a wedding while your partner claimed to be too busy with work to visit until the last minute, like and subscribe to this channel. My family was excited to finally meet him in person after 3 years of video calls. Andy arrived the night before our wedding, looking tired but happy. He charmed everyone immediately with expensive gifts and kind compliments. My mother said he had gentle eyes. My father appreciated how respectful he seemed. My younger sister could not stop talking about how lucky I was. Nobody questioned anything because Andy seemed generous and devoted. He told stories about his successful business and promised my parents he would take good care of me. The wedding was beautiful. My family cried happy tears. Andy smiled throughout the ceremony, holding my hand like I was the most precious thing in the world. I felt like the luckiest woman alive. Everything seemed absolutely perfect. After just 2 days of being newlyweds in my hometown, Andy said he had to return immediately for an urgent business meeting. He apologized many times and promised I would join him soon. He said my visa needed final approval and would take about 3 weeks. During those weeks, we talked every day like always. He seemed excited about my arrival and kept saying how much he missed me. He showed me pictures of our house through video calls. It looked modern and spacious with beautiful furniture. He talked about the neighborhood, the nearby markets, and all the places we would visit together. I spent those 3 weeks packing my entire life into 2 suitcases and saying goodbye to everything familiar. My family threw me a going-away party. Everyone was happy for my new adventure. Finally, my visa was approved. The flight was 16 hours long. I tried to sleep but mostly imagined my new life. My hands shook during landing. Andy was waiting at the airport with flowers, but something felt different about him. His smile seemed tight and forced. The car ride home was mostly silent. When we arrived at the house, it looked exactly like the pictures. But the moment we walked inside, the atmosphere felt cold and unwelcoming. Andy showed me to a bedroom and told me to rest from the long flight. I noticed immediately it was not the master bedroom. When I asked why we were not sharing a room, his face changed completely. He snapped that he needed his own space, and I was already being clingy. His tone shocked me deeply. This was not the man I had known for 3 years. Before I could respond, he grabbed his keys and left the house without explaining where he was going. I stood alone in that unfamiliar bedroom, confused and hurt. Something was terribly wrong. I explored the house slowly, trying to understand what was happening. The living room had expensive furniture but no personal photographs or warm touches. In the master bedroom, I found women's clothing hanging in the closet. Expensive dresses, high-heeled shoes, and jewelry on the dresser. My stomach twisted into knots. I told myself these must belong to his sister or maybe his mother. But deep down, I already knew the truth. I just was not ready to face it yet. The first week passed in a terrible routine that made no sense. Andy left the house before sunrise and returned after midnight. He barely looked at me or spoke to me. When I tried to start conversations, he acted annoyed like I was bothering him. He never ate the meals I cooked with care. He never asked how I was adjusting or if I needed anything. When I asked about exploring the neighborhood or meeting his family, he said firmly that I needed to stay inside the house. He said I did not understand the culture or language. He said I would embarrass him if people saw me. His cruel words cut deeper each time. I started feeling like a prisoner instead of a wife. At night, Andy locked himself in the master bedroom while I stayed alone in the guest room. One evening I knocked on his door, asking quietly why he was treating me this way. He opened the door just enough to look at me with pure disgust in his eyes. He said I was pathetic and annoying. He said bringing me here was already his biggest mistake. Then he slammed the door hard in my face. I cried myself to sleep that night, wondering what I had done to deserve this treatment. 2 weeks after my arrival, I decided to wash Andy's clothes to try being a good wife. While checking pockets before laundry, I found a restaurant receipt. Dinner for 2 people, expensive wine, and dessert. The date was from 4 days ago, a night Andy said he worked late at the office. My hands started trembling as I held that small piece of paper. I searched more carefully through his jackets and found more receipts. Movie tickets for 2 people. Flowers purchased from an expensive shop. All from recent dates. When Andy came home that evening, I confronted him as calmly as possible. I showed him the receipts and asked who he was spending time with. His face transformed into something ugly and frightening. He grabbed my wrist hard enough to leave marks and told me I had absolutely no right to go through his belongings. He called me a paranoid, stupid woman. He said I should be grateful he even allowed me to stay in his house. His house, not our house. Those words hit me like physical punches. He shoved me away roughly and stormed out the door. I sank to the kitchen floor, shaking and crying. This man was a complete stranger. Where was the Andy I had known for 3 years? That night, I almost called my mother, but shame stopped me from admitting the truth. I started paying very close attention to every small detail around me. Andy received phone calls that he always took outside or in locked rooms. He constantly hit his phone screen when I walked near him. He came home late at night smelling like women's perfume that was definitely not mine. The women's clothes in the master bedroom closet were not old or stored away. They were current styles that had been worn recently. I found makeup and skincare products in the bathroom that I had never seen before. When I finally asked Andy directly if another woman was involved in his life, he laughed cruelly right in my face. He said I was being dramatic and pathetically insecure. He said maybe I was not intelligent enough to be his wife after all. He said women from my country were all the same, desperate and clingy. Each insult felt like being slapped hard across the face. The horrible truth was that I had no money of my own here. My visa depended completely on him staying my husband. I was thousands of miles away from everyone who loved me. I felt trapped in a nightmare with no escape. But I refused to believe my entire life was destroyed forever. There had to be something I could do. I just needed time to figure out what. 3 weeks after my arrival, I heard a car pulling into the driveway during the afternoon. Andy was supposed to be at his office working. I looked out the window and saw an elegant woman stepping out of an expensive luxury car. She was beautiful, confident, and she was holding keys to the house. My house. She walked straight through the front door like she owned the place. I stood frozen in the hallway as this stranger stopped walking and stared at me with complete shock on her face. For a long, terrible moment, neither of us spoke or moved. Then she asked in sharp, clear English who I was and what I was doing in her home. Her home. I felt like the floor was disappearing beneath my feet. My voice shook as I said I was Andy's wife. Her face went completely pale like she might faint. Then her cheeks turned bright red with fury. She pulled out her phone with trembling hands and showed me photographs. Her and Andy dressed in wedding clothes. Them on romantic vacations together. Them at family celebrations with many people. Years and years of history. She said her name was Livy, and she had been legally married to Andy for 7 years. 7 whole years. I could not breathe or think. The room started spinning around me. Livy was shaking with pure rage. She immediately made a phone call, speaking rapidly in her native language. I caught Andy's name repeated many times with angry emphasis. She was clearly calling him and demanding he come home right now. Then she turned back to me, and her anger shifted slightly toward confusion. She asked how long I had known Andy existed. I told her absolutely everything through my tears. 3 years of daily video calls. The proposal after 2 years. The wedding ceremony. How Andy had arrived just the night before our wedding. How he had treated me like complete garbage from the moment I arrived here 3 weeks ago. Livy's angry expression changed as she listened to my story. She sat down slowly on the couch, looking genuinely stunned. She pulled out her phone and started checking dates and messages. She said Andy had told her he was traveling for important business meetings during that exact time. He had actually visited my country at least twice before our wedding, she realized while scrolling through old messages. He had been lying constantly to both of us for months. We sat together in awful, heavy silence. Two wives who had been completely deceived. Both of us trapped by the same terrible man. Neither of us knowing what to do next or how this could be real. Andy arrived at the house exactly 40 minutes later, walking fast. He came through the door and froze completely when he saw both of us sitting together in the living room. For the first time since I had arrived in this country, I saw real fear flash across his face. Livy stood up immediately and unleashed absolute fury in her language. I could not understand her words, but the tone was crystal clear. Andy tried talking over her, making excuses and denials, but she refused to let him speak. Then she suddenly switched to English, probably so I could understand everything. She demanded to know how he could possibly marry another woman. He said the situation was complicated and hard to explain. She asked if he thought she was completely stupid. He said she did not understand his perspective. They went back and forth, voices rising higher while I sat frozen on the couch. My whole world had shattered into pieces. Finally, Andy's usual arrogance came flooding back to his face. He said coldly that he did what he wanted to do. He said Livy had refused to give him children from the beginning of their marriage, so he simply found someone who would. He looked directly at me with completely cold eyes and stated that giving him a child was my only purpose for existing. Nothing more than that. I felt sick to my stomach hearing those words said out loud. The entire room went dead silent after Andy's cruel confession. He had married me for only one reason, to have a child, because Livy had refused. Their marriage had included a clear agreement from the very start about never having children. Livy came from an extremely wealthy family and had never wanted kids in her life. Andy had agreed to this arrangement to gain access to her family's money and business connections. But secretly, he wanted children anyway, so he found me online. A naive woman from another country who would give him exactly what he wanted. I was nothing but a tool to him, a means to an end. Livy looked at me with something that seemed like genuine pity mixed with anger. She said she had absolutely no idea Andy would do something this extreme and permanent. She thought his occasional business trips might involve temporary affairs, nothing serious or lasting. She never imagined in her worst nightmares that he would actually marry someone else. Andy stood in the middle of the room looking merely annoyed, like we were both overreacting to something small. He told Livy this situation did not have to change anything important between them. He told me I should simply accept my role here and stop causing unnecessary problems. His breathtaking arrogance was almost unbelievable. He actually seemed to believe that both of us would just accept this insane situation and continue living this way. He was completely wrong about that. Livy made her decision within seconds. She told Andy firmly to leave the house immediately and not come back. He actually laughed at her and said confidently it was his house too. Livy pulled out her phone and showed him something on the screen. Her face was completely calm, but her eyes looked like ice. She explained slowly that the house was registered only in her name. The expensive car he drove every day was in her name. His credit cards were all connected to her family's bank accounts. Literally everything he had in his life came from her family's wealth and connections. If he did not leave the house right this second, she would cut him off from everything completely. Andy's confident face changed as he realized she was completely serious. He tried to argue and threaten, but Livy refused to listen to another word. She made a quick phone call, speaking in her language. 10 minutes later, two very large men arrived at the front door. Livy said something to them, and they immediately walked toward Andy with purpose. He started cursing loudly at both of us, making threats about how we would regret this. But he left, slamming the door behind him. After Andy was finally gone, Livy turned to face me directly. She said I could stay in the house temporarily while I figured out my next steps. I did not completely trust her yet, but I had absolutely nowhere else to go in this foreign country. I accepted her offer carefully. The next several days felt completely strange and uncomfortable. Livy and I mostly avoided each other in the big house, but sometimes we had short conversations. She slowly explained that her marriage to Andy had been practical and business-focused from the very beginning. Her wealthy family wanted her married to maintain their social reputation and appearances. Andy desperately wanted access to their powerful business connections and money. She had been absolutely clear from day one that she never wanted children under any circumstances. Andy had agreed to her terms without any argument. But obviously, he had been lying about accepting that major part of their agreement. Livy admitted she had suspected for years that Andy was probably having affairs with other women. She had chosen to ignore the signs because their arrangement was never actually about love or romance. This situation was completely different, though. Marriage was permanent and legal. A child would be permanent and tie them together forever. Andy had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. I asked her directly why she was helping me instead of just sending me away. She said it was because we were both Andy's victims, just in very different ways. She could have easily kicked me out immediately, but something about my desperate situation bothered her conscience. Maybe it was guilt for not seeing Andy clearly. Maybe it was pure anger at him. Either way, I was genuinely grateful. I started desperately looking for any possible solutions to my terrible situation. Livy introduced me to a lawyer named Patricia who specialized in immigration cases and family law. Patricia was sharp, direct, and did not waste time on unnecessary words. She explained clearly that my visa was legally tied to my marriage to Andy. If the marriage ended officially, I would have very limited time to find another visa option or be forced to leave the country. But there were some possibilities if we acted quickly and carefully. Patricia asked about my work skills and education. I told her I was a trained teacher with several years of experience. She said that was actually very promising because schools in this country often needed qualified English teachers. She would help me start looking immediately for teaching positions. Meanwhile, Patricia advised me strongly to document absolutely everything about Andy's deception and cruel treatment. Even though having 2 marriages in different countries was not technically illegal everywhere, the way Andy had manipulated me might provide some legal protection for my situation. I started writing down every single detail I could remember. Every lie he told, every cruel word he said, every warning sign I had missed. Seeing everything written out on paper was extremely painful. But it also became very clear that Andy was simply a manipulative, two-faced man who had never cared about me at all. He had used me for his own selfish purposes from the very beginning. I found a job teaching English at a community center that served immigrant families and their children. The pay was not very much, but it was honest work and gave me purpose. The director was a kind older woman who seemed willing to sponsor a work visa if I stayed long-term and proved myself. Patricia immediately helped me start the complicated paperwork for changing my visa status. For the first time since arriving in this nightmare country, I felt a tiny spark of real hope. Meanwhile, Andy kept calling both Livy and me constantly from different phone numbers. His messages went back and forth between apologizing and threatening us. He said he truly loved both of us. Then he said we were both ungrateful and selfish. He said he would take me back if I apologized sincerely. Then he said I was completely worthless. His mood changed like crazy from message to message. Livy blocked every number he used. I did the same thing. But Patricia told me to save and screenshot all the messages first as evidence of his unstable character. I moved out of Livy's house into a small rented room in a building near my new job. It was tiny and the furniture was old, but it belonged to me. No more living under Andy's shadow or control. I was slowly starting to build something real for myself. I was becoming someone I could actually be proud of again. Andy showed up unexpectedly at my workplace one afternoon during my class. He caused a terrible scene right in front of my young students and their shocked parents. He yelled loudly that I had stolen money from him and destroyed his marriage on purpose. It was absolutely humiliating. Security guards had to physically remove him from the building while he kept shouting. The damage was already done, though. I felt mortified and ashamed. My boss called me into her office the next morning. I thought for sure I was going to be fired. Instead, she surprised me by saying several parents had contacted her after witnessing what happened. They wanted to know if I was truly safe. They offered to help however they possibly could. My boss said she completely believed me when I explained my whole situation honestly. She said Andy was now permanently banned from the property. I actually cried from relief and gratitude. These people barely knew me at all, but they were showing me more kindness than my own husband ever had. Word spread quickly through the tight immigrant community about what had happened. People started treating me with extra kindness and concern. They checked on me regularly and invited me to community events and dinners. I was making genuine, real connections in this foreign place that had felt so cold before. I was building an actual support system of caring people. Livy called me one evening and asked to meet for coffee at a quiet cafe. She looked tired and stressed when she arrived. She explained that Andy had been harassing her constantly through phone calls and messages. He was showing up at her family's business offices and embarrassing her in front of important clients and partners. Her family was absolutely furious with his behavior. They had always tolerated Andy because he mostly stayed in line and followed their rules. Now he was completely out of control and becoming a serious problem. Livy said her family wanted to cut all ties with him permanently and totally. They were extremely influential people in business and high society. If they actively turned against Andy, his entire life in this country would become very difficult. She asked me directly if I wanted to be part of making that happen to him. I hesitated for a moment. Part of me just wanted to move forward with my own life and forget Andy existed. But then I remembered clearly how Andy had treated me with such cruelty. The constant insults. The arrogance. How he made me feel completely worthless and stupid. How he told me my only purpose was to give him a child, like I was farm livestock. He needed to understand that he could not treat people this way without consequences. I looked at Livy and told her I was definitely in. Whatever she was planning, I would help however I could. Livy's family owned several successful businesses throughout the city. Andy had been using his marriage connection to them to maintain his reputation as a successful businessman. In reality, he had no real success of his own at all. Everything was borrowed from Livy's family status and money. Her family started making quiet phone calls to their business contacts and partners. They politely let important people know that Andy was no longer associated with their family business in any way. Business contacts immediately stopped returning Andy's phone calls and emails. Invitations to important networking events and social gatherings simply disappeared. His professional network collapsed within weeks. Andy tried fighting back by spreading ugly lies about both Livy and me. He told people we were crazy and unstable. He said we had conspired together against him unfairly. He claimed he was actually the victim in this situation. Some people believed his lies at first. But Livy's family had decades of credibility and respected history in the community. Andy had neither of those things. Slowly but surely, his reputation crumbled into dust. He lost the nice apartment he had been renting because he could not afford it without Livy's financial support. He had to move into a much smaller and cheaper place in a bad neighborhood. His comfortable lifestyle was disappearing piece by piece. Still, Andy refused to accept any responsibility for his actions. He blamed everyone else but himself for his problems. My visa situation finally improved after months of stress and uncertainty. Patricia successfully argued for a work-based visa tied directly to my teaching job at the community center. I no longer needed Andy for anything at all. That freedom felt absolutely incredible and overwhelming. I celebrated by buying myself a small gift, just a book I had wanted to read, with my own honestly earned money. It was symbolic of my new independence. I was taking care of myself now without anyone's help. Livy and I had developed an unusual friendship through this shared experience. We met regularly for coffee to share updates about Andy's steadily declining situation. She was finally pursuing an official divorce through the courts. Her family supported her decision fully now. She admitted feeling lighter, like a heavy weight had lifted off her shoulders. Andy had been a burden for many years, but she had convinced herself the practical arrangement was worth the cost. Now she realized how much he had actually taken from her over time. Not just money, although that too, but her dignity and peace of mind. I understood exactly what she meant from my own experience. Andy had a special talent for making people feel small and worthless, making them doubt themselves constantly. He was a master manipulator who wore completely different faces for different people in his life. 5 months after I first arrived in the country, my life looked completely different than before. I had my own small apartment that was comfortable and safe. I had expanded to full-time teaching at the community center. My students genuinely loved my classes and looked forward to them. I had made real friends who knew my whole difficult story and supported me anyway. I was even learning the local language properly through classes and practice. This foreign place was slowly becoming home, not because of Andy, but despite everything he had done. One evening, I ran into Andy by accident at a neighborhood market. He looked absolutely terrible, worn down and angry. His clothes were wrinkled and his face looked thin. He approached me aggressively and demanded to talk privately. I calmly told him we had nothing to discuss anymore. He raised his voice immediately, calling me selfish and ungrateful for everything he had done. People around us stopped shopping and stared at the scene. An older woman nearby asked loudly if I needed help. I said yes, I did. She and several other people stood between Andy and me until he finally left, still cursing. After he was gone, the kind woman asked if I was okay and safe. I realized with surprise that I truly was okay. Andy could not hurt me anymore with his words or threats. His opinions were just meaningless noise now. I had survived his cruelty and built something real and good for myself. Livy's divorce was officially finalized by the court. She was genuinely happy for the first time since I had met her months ago. She said her entire family felt relieved too. Andy had become a serious embarrassment to them socially and professionally. They had tried being patient because of Livy, but his terrible behavior after our situation exploded made continuing impossible. Livy told me something very interesting over coffee one afternoon. She said her family had investigated Andy's background thoroughly after everything happened. They discovered he had been lying about his credentials and work experience when they first met 7 years ago. He had exaggerated his education and business success significantly to impress her wealthy family. Everything about Andy from the beginning was a carefully planned performance. Nothing was real or honest. She said she felt stupid for not seeing through him sooner. But I completely understood that feeling. Andy was extremely good at presenting exactly what people wanted to see. That was his only real skill in life. Manipulation and elaborate lies. But now everyone could see him clearly for what he truly was. He had nowhere left to hide from the truth. No one left to deceive or use. All his different masks had fallen away completely, leaving just an angry, arrogant man with absolutely nothing. Andy tried one final time to contact me directly. He sent a very long message through a mutual acquaintance we both knew. In the message, he apologized for how he had treated me badly. He said he was wrong about many things and wanted to make everything right between us. He said he still wanted a child and thought maybe we could try again with a fresh start. The pure audacity shocked me completely. Even now, after absolutely everything that had happened, he thought he could manipulate me back into his life. He thought a simple apology would erase months of cruelty and lies. He thought I was still that naive, trusting woman who had believed everything he said. I did not respond to his message at all. I blocked the mutual acquaintance immediately and moved on with my life. Patricia said it was good I had documented and saved the message, though. It showed clearly Andy's continuing attempts at manipulation and control. My work visa process was going very smoothly now. I was building steadily toward permanent residency in the country. My life had a real future now based completely on my own hard efforts and choices. I even started casually dating someone I met through my teaching work. It was light and casual, nothing serious yet. But it reminded me that I deserved basic kindness and respect. That relationships should not hurt constantly. That love should not feel like drowning in deep water. 7 months after my arrival, I received an unexpected call from Patricia with shocking news. Andy had been arrested by police. It was not for anything related to me or our situation, but for lying on official business documents. He had been desperately trying to restart his professional career by completely falsifying his credentials and references. Someone had reported him to authorities. The charges were quite serious. Patricia explained this changed my situation significantly. With Andy now facing criminal charges, his credibility was totally destroyed. If he ever tried claiming I had done something wrong or tried challenging my visa status, absolutely no one would believe him. He had become a proven liar in the eyes of the law. But more importantly, Patricia had discovered something crucial while carefully reviewing Andy's immigration documents. He had lied directly to immigration officials when sponsoring my visa application. He had claimed we had met in person many times before our marriage. But the truth was we only met in person once, the night before our wedding ceremony. Patricia found proof that Andy had only visited my country twice total, and both trips were supposedly for business, according to his official travel records. He had completely fabricated our relationship timeline to make my visa application appear stronger and more legitimate. This was actual fraud committed entirely by Andy, not by me. I was his victim, not his partner in crime. Patricia immediately filed a detailed report about Andy's false statements on my visa application. Immigration officials opened a formal investigation into his actions. During their investigation, they discovered Andy had done similar dishonest things before with his own visa applications and various business permits over the years. He had an established pattern of lying to government authorities whenever it benefited him. The business document fraud he was just arrested for was simply his latest example. Everything about Andy's entire life was built on layer after layer of deception. Andy was convicted for his business document fraud and given a 1-year suspended sentence with strict probation terms. But the immigration violations were considered much more serious by authorities. He faced severe penalties, including the real possibility of deportation. He himself was not originally from this country either. He had immigrated years ago for work opportunities and stayed. The irony was absolutely perfect. Andy had constantly used my visa status as a threat and control mechanism over me. Now his own immigration status was at serious risk. Livy told me her family had quietly provided some evidence to authorities about Andy's past misrepresentations when they had first hired him years ago. They wanted to ensure he faced full consequences for all his lies over time. Andy's entire world had completely collapsed around him. Everything he had carefully built on manipulation and lies was gone forever. Andy was ultimately stripped of all his professional work permits and licenses. He was permanently barred from applying for any business licenses in the country. He lost his legal ability to work professionally in his field. His immigration status was downgraded to conditional residency under constant official review. He became exactly what he had tried to make me feel like months ago. Powerless, dependent, and with authorities watching his every single move. Livy told me through a message that Andy had been forced to move back in with distant relatives who barely tolerated having him there. His arrogance was finally completely broken. He was humbled in every possible way by his own actions. Meanwhile, my life continued flourishing and growing stronger. My work visa successfully converted to permanent residency. I was promoted to head teacher at the community center. I moved into a much better apartment in a nice neighborhood. I reconciled fully with my family back home, who visited and saw with their own eyes how well I was doing. They were so proud of me for surviving and rebuilding my entire life. 1 year after arriving in this country as Andy's victim and tool, I stood in my own apartment surrounded by real friends, celebrating my new life and success. I thought about that scared, confused woman who had arrived at the airport expecting love and finding only cruelty. I was not her anymore. I was so much stronger, wiser, and finally completely free. Andy had tried to use me and throw me away like garbage. Instead, I built something beautiful from the ashes of his lies. If this story moved you, if you have ever faced betrayal and wondered if you could survive it, like, share, and subscribe for more stories of survival, justice, and transformation. Thank you for listening to my journey. I am Crystal, and I am finally home.